Lucas Carter had always dreamed of finding the perfect place to settle down. A quiet, well-maintained neighborhood where he could finally enjoy some peace. So when he moved into Maplewood Estates, a picturesque suburban community with neatly trimmed lawns and smiling neighbors, he thought he had struck gold. But behind the manicured gardens and friendly waves lurked something far more sinister. A group of self-appointed enforcers who ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. The so-called Maplewood Homeowners Association wasn't just about keeping the place tidy. It was a dictatorship run by power-hungry residents who acted like a private police force. The HOA officers were nothing more than middle-aged men in cheap uniforms, strutting around with fake badges, walkie-talkies, and citation books filled with absurd infractions. They fined people for trivial things: mailboxes an inch too tall, cars parked slightly off-center, kids riding bikes on sidewalks. But when they set their sights on Lucas, they made a fatal mistake. You see, Lucas wasn't just another homeowner. He was the county sheriff. And when the fake HOA cops tried to tow his truck and even arrest him, they had no idea that they had just messed with the wrong guy. Lucas Carter had barely finished moving in when he got his first taste of the so-called law in Maplewood Estates. As he stepped out onto his driveway, still sipping his morning coffee, a man in a tight navy polo and wraparound sunglasses approached with the air of someone who thought he was more important than he was. "Sir, you can't park here overnight," the man announced, gesturing at Lucas's black pickup truck. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "It's my driveway. HOA regulations prohibit work vehicles from being visible from the street." Lucas glanced at his truck. No logos, no modifications, just a standard pickup. "This is my personal vehicle." The man shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It's a violation." Lucas let out a dry chuckle and walked inside, thinking that was the end of it. But the next morning, he found a bright orange citation taped to his windshield, a $250 fine for unauthorized parking. That's when he realized Maplewood's HOA wasn't just nosy, it was corrupt. Over the next week, Lucas observed the so-called officers in action. They fined an elderly couple for having a bird feeder, threatened a single mother over the color of her shutters, and even tried to write up a teenager for skateboarding on the sidewalk. It was all a power trip. But Lucas wasn't just another resident who didn't know his rights. He was the law. And soon, these wannabe cops were about to find out exactly what that meant. The following morning, Lucas decided to ignore the ridiculous citation, knowing it had no legal authority. But ignoring these HOA enforcers was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. As he sat on his porch, sipping his coffee, he noticed two of them loitering at the end of his driveway. One was the same man from before, the beer-bellied guy with sunglasses. The other was wiry, clipboard in hand, talking into a cheap walkie-talkie like he was coordinating a SWAT operation. Lucas heard snippets of their conversation. Unauthorized vehicle. Tow request. Proceed with removal. Moments later, a rusted tow truck rumbled down the street. Lucas sighed, setting down his mug. These guys were really about to do something stupid. The tow truck driver looked half asleep, barely paying attention to the HOA goons waving him over. Lucas strolled down his driveway, keeping his voice calm. "You might want to think real hard about what you're doing." Clipboard guy's face lit up with smug confidence. "Sir, your vehicle is in violation. We've issued multiple citations. HOA bylaws state unauthorized vehicles are subject to removal." Lucas crossed his arms. "Tell you what, before you so much as hook a chain to my truck, I want you to call the police." Clipboard guy scoffed. "That won't be necessary." Lucas smirked. Oh, but it will be. Because what they were about to do wasn't just an HOA violation. It was grand theft auto. Clipboard guy didn't get it. Not yet. He stood there, arms crossed, staring at Lucas like he was just another unruly homeowner who needed to be put in his place. Beerbelly, on the other hand, had started to sweat. Lucas reached into his back pocket, pulling out his wallet and flipping it open. The gold badge inside caught the morning sun. Not a claim, he said, his voice steady. A fact. The reaction was almost comical. Beerbelly took a half step back, looking like someone had just yanked the ground out from under him. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Clipboard guy, however, wasn't as quick on the uptake. Well, that doesn't change HOA regulations, he said stubbornly, arms still crossed. We have the right to enforce community standards. Lucas let out a low chuckle. No, you don't. You are not law enforcement. You have zero legal authority to fine, tow, or punish anyone beyond basic HOA agreements. And since I never signed any agreement with your little dictatorship. Lucas took a deliberate step closer, lowering his voice just enough to make Clipboard guy squirm. You have no power over me whatsoever. The tow truck driver, sensing where this was going, threw up his hands. Yeah, I'm out, he muttered, shifting his truck into reverse and backing down the street. Clipboard guy's face turned red. You can't just ignore HOA bylaws. Lucas leaned in slightly. And you can't impersonate a police officer. Silence. Clipboard guy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Beerbelly muttered, This isn't over. But the bravado was gone. They turned and stalked away, their little fantasy of power shattered. Lucas knew guys like them, the kind who didn't take humiliation lightly, the kind who always doubled down when backed into a corner. Sure enough, they were about to make an even bigger mistake. Lucas didn't have to wait long. The HOA had a community meeting scheduled that week, a glorified stage for them to flex their fake authority in front of homeowners too intimidated to push back. Lucas hadn't planned to attend, but after the truck incident, his curiosity got the better of him. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a place meant for social events, but now resembling a makeshift military briefing room. The HOA board sat at the front, while the officers flanked the sides, arms crossed like they were guarding the president. The head of the HOA, Gregory Holt, a wiry man who clearly lived for this tiny scrap of power, cleared his throat. We have some serious matters to discuss, he began, puffing himself up. Certain residents have ignored fines, disrespected our officers, and interfered with enforcement actions. His eyes flicked to Lucas for just a second, and then, we are placing resident Lucas Carter under citizen's arrest for obstruction of HOA enforcement. Clipboard guy stepped forward, pulling out a pair of plastic zip ties. Sir, he ordered, voice firm, stand up. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Lucas burst out laughing. Lucas Carter wasn't the kind of man who laughed easily. But this was the funniest thing he'd seen in years. His laughter echoed through the clubhouse, bouncing off the walls, making the so-called HOA officers shift uncomfortably. Clipboard guy hesitated, zip ties still in hand, thrown off by the reaction he clearly hadn't expected. Holt, the HOA president, turned beet red. This is not a joke, he snapped. You are under arrest. Lucas wiped a tear from his eye. Oh, it's definitely a joke, he said, standing up. And you? You're the punchline. Clipboard guy took a step closer. Sir, if you resist, We will be forced to. Lucas held up a single finger. Stop. Then, with his other hand, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his badge, holding it up for everyone to see. County Sheriff's Department, he said, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. You will be forced to… What exactly? The reaction was instant. Clipboard guy froze, his face draining of color. Beer Belly took a slow step back, sweat forming on his forehead. Holt's mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning ventriloquist dummy. Somewhere in the front row, a homeowner let out a muffled, "Oh, damn." Lucas stepped forward, closing the gap between himself and the two fake cops. Let me explain something to you, he said, his voice calm but firm. A citizen's arrest requires an actual crime to have been committed. Violating HOA rules? Not a crime. Ignoring fines from a bunch of wannabe lawmen? Not a crime. Telling you to shove your fake authority where the sun doesn't shine? Lucas smirked. Also not a crime. Holt was losing his grip, fast. You can't just waltz in here and… Lucas cut him off. Oh, I can, and I did. He turned toward the other homeowners, most of whom looked both amused and horrified. And I'll tell you something else, he continued. These guys aren't just annoying, they're criminals. Lucas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook. See? I've been doing some digging, and guess what? This so-called HOA enforcement squad isn't just making up rules. They're impersonating law enforcement. He let that sink in before adding, which is a felony. Beer Belly made a noise somewhere between a cough and a whimper. Clipboard guy looked like he was about to pass out. But Holt was still clinging to his delusion of control. This is outrageous, he sputtered. You have no authority over the HOA. Lucas raised an eyebrow. That's adorable, he said. Because not only do I have jurisdiction here. He reached into his back pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it around to face the entire room. But I also have a recording of your little criminal conspiracy. And just like that, the walls of their fake empire started to crumble. The clubhouse was dead silent. All eyes were locked on the phone in Lucas's hand. He pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Holt's own voice, recorded from a previous HOA meeting. We need to set an example. If we let him get away with ignoring our rules, other residents might start pushing back. Clipboard guy's voice followed, nervous. But what about legal repercussions? Could we get in trouble for this? Holt's response was damning. It's only a crime if they call the real police. We control this neighborhood. If we make them think we have authority, they won't question it. Lucas hit pause. The room exploded. Homeowners whispered in shock, casting angry glances at Holt and his goons. A woman in the front clutched her purse like she had just realized she had been funding a criminal enterprise. Holt's face twisted with panic, but he tried to keep his composure. That's taken out of context, he stammered. You have no proof of actual wrongdoing. Lucas smirked. That's funny, he said, pulling out another piece of paper. Because this here is a formal complaint from multiple homeowners. They've reported harassment, fraudulent fines, and even threats from you and your fake officers. He turned to the audience. Mrs. Calloway, would you like to confirm? A woman in her 60s, sitting near the front, stood up. They took over $8,000 from me in 2 years, she said, voice shaking with fury. Said my fence was 2 inches too high, and that if I didn't pay, they'd put a lien on my house. Lucas nodded. And Mr. Dawson? An older man grunted. They sent me fake legal notices, threatening court action if I didn't pay up. Greg told me it was for the good of the neighborhood. He shot Holt a glare. You lied to us. More voices joined in. You overcharged us for HOA fees every year. I paid thousands in fines for things that weren't even against the rules. You scammed all of us, Holt. The room shifted from disbelief to outrage. Holt was trapped. Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn over every single financial record this HOA has. Bank statements, payment logs, the works. If you don't, I'll make sure the state attorney's office gets involved. Holt visibly trembled. You can't do this, he whispered. You have no jurisdiction here. Lucas raised an eyebrow. That's adorable, he said, because right on cue. The front doors swung open. 3 uniformed sheriff's deputies walked in, their expressions unreadable. The room collectively gasped. Lucas turned back to Holt with a grin. Greg, I'd like you to meet some real law enforcement officers. They're here to make sure everything goes nice and smooth from here on out. The walls of Holt's empire had been cracking. Now they were about to collapse. The moment the real deputies stepped into the clubhouse, whatever delusions of control Holt had left vanished. Clipboard Guy looked like he was about to pass out. Beer Belly had broken into a nervous sweat. And Holt? Holt took a single, staggering step back, his face shifting through every shade of red. One of the deputies, a no-nonsense officer named Ramirez, rested a hand on her belt. We received a report of criminal activity being conducted under the guise of an HOA enforcement group, she said, her voice sharp. We have reason to believe that members of this organization have engaged in fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, and financial extortion of homeowners. Holt let out a strangled laugh, though it sounded weak. This is insane. You can't just barge in here and… Actually, we can, Lucas interrupted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a neatly folded piece of paper. This here is a search warrant, signed by a judge this morning. Holt's entire body stiffened. Lucas let the weight of that sink in before handing the warrant to Ramirez. So, she continued, we'll be taking a look at every single document, financial record, and citation this HOA has issued over the past 5 years. Holt's last shred of defiance slipped away. You can't, he croaked. Oh, we can, Ramirez said, stepping forward, and we will. 2 of the other deputies immediately moved in, one heading straight for the filing cabinet in the corner, the other approaching the HOA's so-called security team. The deputy in front of Clipboard Guy held out a hand. Let's see that badge. Clipboard Guy hesitated, then slowly reached up and unclipped the cheap metal emblem from his polo shirt. The deputy turned it over in his hands, then let out a scoff. You bought these online, didn't you? Clipboard Guy swallowed hard. Save it. The deputy pocketed the fake badge. You realize impersonating law enforcement is a felony, right? Beer Belly made a noise that sounded somewhere between a cough and a whimper. We didn't impersonate. Oh, really? Lucas cut in, pulling out his phone again. Because I have video evidence of you threatening homeowners, using police-style jargon, and attempting to arrest me with plastic zip ties. The deputy turned to Beer Belly. Hands where I can see them. Beer Belly hesitated. Now. With a defeated groan, he slowly raised his hands. The deputy spun him around, yanking his arms behind his back and slapping on a pair of real handcuffs. Clipboard Guy was next. He didn't even resist. The room erupted into hushed whispers. Some people pulled out their phones to record. Holt, watching his so-called officers get arrested, took a step back. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This can't be happening!" Lucas crossed his arms. "Oh, it's happening, Greg." Holt's eyes darted toward the clubhouse exit. Lucas smirked. "Go ahead. Try to run. I dare you." Holt didn't run. He couldn't. The moment he even considered bolting, one of the deputies stepped in front of the door, arms crossed. No escape. Lucas took a step closer, his voice low and calm. "You know what the best part is, Greg?" Holt just stared, his face pale. Lucas smirked. "All those fines, citations, and threats you handed out? None of them were legally binding." The realization hit Holt like a freight train. That means every single resident you scammed, every person you bullied into paying you? Lucas folded his arms. "They can sue you." A man in the front row stood up, arms crossed. "Damn right we will." A woman near the back nodded. "You stole thousands from me, Greg. You're going to pay for this." More voices joined in. Anger building. Years of frustration boiling over. Holt stumbled back. He opened his mouth, desperate for an excuse, a defense. But there was nothing left to say. Ramirez pulled out a pair of handcuffs and stepped forward. "Gregory Holt," she said, her voice firm, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The room burst into applause. Holt didn't resist, didn't fight. He just stood there, defeated, as the cold metal snapped around his wrists. The fake sheriff was finally facing real justice. By the time the dust settled, the entire HOA empire had collapsed. Holt, facing 15 years in federal prison. Clipboard guy and beer belly, each sentenced to 10 years for aiding in fraud. The stolen money, court ordered to be repaid to the homeowners. The HOA itself, dissolved permanently. The nightmare was over. No more unnecessary fees, no more ridiculous vehicle bans, no more fake cops harassing people over mailboxes. But Lucas wasn't done yet. "The people in this neighborhood deserve better," he told the community. "So let's make sure this never happens again." Instead of replacing the corrupt HOA with another power-hungry board, they formed a resident-led committee. No more dictatorship, just neighbors working together. Their first order of business? A block party. The same clubhouse Holt once ruled over like a tyrant, now filled with laughter. Families brought food. Kids ran around without fear of being fined for playing. For the first time in years, Maplewood felt like home again. And Lucas? He enjoyed a cold beer, watching the people he had helped. But the real reward? The look on Holt's face the last time Lucas saw him in court, just before they hauled him away in an orange jumpsuit. The mighty HOA president was now just another crook behind bars. And damn, that felt good. Power is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. When unchecked, it breeds corruption, turning ordinary people into tyrants who will do anything to keep their control. Holt and his so-called HOA officers weren't just enforcing rules, they were abusing their authority, scamming innocent homeowners, and acting like they were above the law. But here's the truth: no one is above the law. People like Holt thrive on fear and compliance. They rely on good, honest people backing down because it's easier than fighting back. But the moment someone stands up to them, their empire crumbles. Lucas didn't just expose an HOA scam. He set an example. He proved that standing up to corruption matters, that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, justice will always catch up to them. So if there's one lesson to take from this, never let power-hungry people intimidate you. Know your rights. Stand your ground. And if someone tries to enforce fake authority over you, Make damn sure they aren't messing with the wrong person. HOA scams are real, and many homeowners fall victim to them every year. Here's how to protect yourself. Checkmark, know the rules. If you live in an HOA community, read the bylaws carefully. Don't let anyone tell you what's enforced without checking for yourself. Demand transparency. HOAs must provide financial statements upon request. If they refuse, something is wrong. Challenge unfair fines. If you get fined for something that isn't clearly outlined in the HOA agreement, fight it. Many people just pay up. But that's what corrupt boards count on. Call legal authorities. HOAs do not have law enforcement powers. If they threaten you with arrests or illegal fines, report them to local authorities. At the end of the day, your home is yours. Don't let a bunch of wannabe cops tell you otherwise.